So, welcome to Elected, a podcast for women in and around politics and our active accomplices. Another live episode in the series of sitting down and talking with all of the people running for the leadership of the Alberta NDP. Today's guest is Kathleen Ganley, the NDP MLA for Mountain View in Calgary, and you're running for leadership of the Alberta NDP to replace Rachel Notley. So, and we're recording in front of a group of real people. Is until I forget you're here, it's always a little bit like anxiety inducing. So anyways, Kathleen, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So I'm really curious to know, what was the moment when you thought, either maybe before Rachel announced that she was stepping down, or at what point were you like, this is the job I want to have?
Yeah. So it was actually a bunch of people coming forward and suggesting that it was a job I should consider.
Okay.
I have tended to sort of be in the background, be more of a team builder, right? I read all of the government's legislation when we were in government. I spent a lot of time door knocking with my colleagues here in Calgary to try and support them and get them elected and sort of talk them through, like, it's hard the first time you run, right? And so I spent a lot of time sort of supporting people in that process. And then a few folks came forward and started suggesting it, and I started thinking about it. And ultimately I decided, I think it's something I'm going to try.
Okay. Was there, it's said that women need to be asked more to run, between 3 to 7 times. So would you say that's true of this specific instance?
Yeah, actually, and it's true in both instances. I think I went through 5 people and ultimately Rachel Notley before I ran in 2015, which I think is typical with women. I was asked that's probably about the right number.
The average.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, I something that strikes me about your campaign so far is you're kind of racking up the endorsements. Is that something you're actively seeking out, or are people just really coming forward proactively to support your leadership bid?
I'd say a little bit of both. So obviously I've gone around, in wanting to do this, I've gone around and talked to my colleagues because I think it's important to tell them, like, what I'm about and why I'm doing this. And one of them is to talk about the economy, but the other reason is to build a team, right? And I really think we need to be focused on that team building. And I really think that going forward, I want to build a team that's like excited to govern the province. So I've gone and talked to a lot of people. Some people have come forward proactively, some people in response to those conversations, and some people even before that.
Okay. So that team building aspect is really important, especially in provincial politics, because it's not an individual game, right?
Exactly.
Yes. I mean, you can be a lone independent but that's a hard road to go. But in that team building, in terms of people who may or may not be getting into the race, who may, have potentially a larger hill to climb in terms of building a coalition from within the membership and caucus. What's your take on people coming into that with that outsider lens?
Yeah. So far we have 4 women in the race that have come from inside the party. And I think every single one of us is incredible. We also have, Gil McGowan has now put his name forward officially. And Gil has been like a very consistent advocate for workers. I think he's a great voice to have in the race. I'm excited about that.
Once he's over his bout of COVID.
I know. I can't imagine the worst timing. I feel so bad for him, right? Because it's such launching your campaign is such an exciting moment, right? It's like, I was describing it to someone as like when you get married, right? Where you're like all worried about, like, is the cake going to be right? And it's like, am I going to say the right thing? And like, am I going to trip over my shoes or whatever? And then like, you actually get to the moment and you're just like so happy, right? So I'm sad for him that he's not going to have that same experience. But I think he'll put forward a powerful voice for workers. And I think that that's something that's really, really important to me and to our party. So I think that that's great. Yeah, I do know that certainly Nenshi is another name that's been bandied about. And I want to be clear, like, I'm happy to have him run. I think it demonstrates what an incredible, strong, progressive coalition Rachel has built, that it looks like something that can govern this province. And it is something that can govern this province.
Yeah, you have a track record now.
Exactly.
You've been in government.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, I'm happy to have him run. I don't think that he should win, obviously.
Honesty. Well, I mean, and also just the aspect of it is that unfortunately there can only be one winner, right? No matter what, even if it was just the four of you, the four women, it's not a, everyone can be the leader kind of situation. That would be a disaster. So yeah, it's we'll have to see what happens, but
but I think all great options, right? Like, I'm incredibly excited that our party has this like diversity and breadth of like people coming forward.
Yeah. Do you think that there will be a backlash actually if there was someone like a Nenshi type to enter, in terms of like, you don't meet, to some people, the test of what it means to be a member of the Alberta NDP, because you're just, dropping in. And I say that because I was thinking about it this morning and thinking like, oh, what do I want to talk to you about? I have the experience of coming from BC and having been a staffer under Gordon Campbell and the BC Liberals. And then when he exited because of a very mismanaged introduction of an HST, and then there was a leadership race, and people from within caucus were like super qualified, had caucus support, everyone, and then Christy Clark got into the race, had one member of caucus supporting her, and really created what was, in my opinion, a huge shift, not only in the race, garnered a lot of attention because she had a huge name recognition as a radio host and as a former politician, but then came in, and the dynamic that it created, there was a mass exodus of MLAs who were just like, I just can't, I just don't want to work with you. We're not aligned. We have different ideologies, but on the staff side as well. Is that something that concerns you if there was someone like an Nenshi that would win? Have you thought about what your world would look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's potentially a concern. I think, like, I have all the respect in the world for Nat Nenshi. I think he did amazing things as a politician. I think he's like one of the best communicators I've ever seen. It's interesting to me that even in the last election, at a very critical moment, like, he was very clear. He's like, I'm not NDP. Right. I don't like partisanship.
Yeah.
He even said that he didn't think that Rachel was a great premier. And I don't agree with that, right? I think Rachel was a great premier.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it remains to be seen what his positions are on all the issues. I'm open to having that conversation. But I do think, members may have some questions, and I think that those are valid.
Of course. Yeah. And if someone didn't want to answer questions, those questions in particular, then obviously that would be, a sign, possibly,
exactly.
Right? Yes. But we'll have to see how all of this plays out. But in terms of positions, like what has been and what you've announced so far, and I say that it's March 9th today, and you have until, so I'm trying to remember the dates now. April 22nd is the membership deadline, right? June 22nd is the actual day of the
announcement.
Race.
That's the day. That's the day we find out.
So how are you bringing out your policies? Is it kind of like a drip drop kind of approach, or?
Yeah, so we're trying to keep it interesting, obviously. In a leadership contest like this, where most people are going to share most of their values,
yes,
you do need to try to generate a little bit of interest.
Yeah.
And so we're sort of rolling them out, I would say, over time. We kind of started with, so my frame is very much about the economy, because I think that is what we need to do more of at the Alberta NDP. I think that in order to win, because 2027 has to be the goal, it has to be the goal for everyone. And in order to win, I think that what we need to do is talk more about the economy. So my thing is an economy that works for people, because I would say the top of mind issue for Albertans right now is like, I can't pay my rent. Yes. I can't buy my groceries. Like, things are too expensive, right? So our first policies that we rolled out were very much around that. We talked about, increasing the personal income tax exemption. So that would mean that no one making $26,000, which is the low income measure right now, would pay provincial tax.
I think that's a great policy.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
And that phases out after the end of the first tax bracket. So at about $148,000.
Yeah.
So it is targeted very much like it's a tax cut that's targeted to low and middle income people. And then
because disproportionately, lower tax brackets pay more, which is, in my opinion, not fair.
I agree.
Because, those with the most wealth, usually have the means to avoid actually paying taxes.
Yes.
And taxes make, our cities and communities and our province the place that it is, right?
Exactly. And because, there's a lot of evidence that giving more to those who are lower income and middle income actually turns the economy, right? Like that's what's better. So the next policy we rolled out was around minimum wage. We would take it to 16 immediately, 17 next year, and then index it to inflation.
So like 2027, assuming you win, and then 2028, 29.
So those are the policy proposal is written as though I were premier right now.
Oh, okay.
Because we just don't know exactly what's
it'll be
happen
in a different
numbers.
Right. We also don't know what the cost of a barrel of oil will be, right?
Yes. But like right now, like at this moment, in the last 5 years, inflation has gone up 18%.
Yeah.
Minimum wage hasn't gone up a dime.
Well, as a small business owner, it's something inflation, it's tough times.
Inflation is a huge pressure on everyone. And I really do think like having those, lower income folks with more money in their pocket actually is good for small business, right? Because they spend it in a local community.
Well, I don't even think of it. I mean, that's what makes me a bad business person. I'm not a good business person, to be honest, at all, because I don't make decisions based on making money, which, is pretty fundamental. Like I do try to obviously make money. But the side of business that really drives me is like the advocacy side, which there's no money.
But this is what society is as its best, right?
Yes. But at that, I want lower income earners to have more money in their pockets because it's going to be better for them and their families and for their kids, and their kids are going to go to school and they're going to have food in their tummies, right? Like
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and that makes our whole society better, right? And
100%.
It used to be the case that when we were sort of like smaller scale, that, business owners were part of the community.
Yeah.
And so they cared about everyone who's around. And I'm not saying that isn't the case now.
But
that's
there's
the
a big
case for
shift.
some.
There's a shift, right? Because especially because of the pandemic, the, reliance on Amazon, big box stores. I mean, we can have a separate conversation about, how I see the changing of main streets, even here in Inglewood, the proliferation of vape shops and pizza businesses. And if you're in those businesses, great. I'm so happy for you. But, I think there's going to come a point where people are in different communities, no matter where you are, that are going to be like, wow, I really miss going to these, small businesses run by, people who know my name. Right. But the economy's in a really tough place right now.
Yeah. And we do when I say economy needs to work for people, this is what I'm talking about. We do need to think about what are we building and what is the purpose, right? If we just measure total growth of the economy and nothing else, we don't think at all about how does our society look, right? What are children growing up with? What are our lives like? Are we having to get in our car and drive 20 minutes every time we want to go to the grocery store?
Well, and I mean, it's interesting because, we're recording this here in Inglewood, and even in Inglewood, we're 2 kilometers from here to City Hall. And the community itself is very NIMBY, right? They are anti-development, they're anti, density. And, it's a big challenge, right? Bringing people who you would naturally maybe see as part of, the movement to build, more of a 15-minute city, can also be your greatest opposition. But tell me about a time when you've had, I'm sure you've had lots of them actually, where you've had a hard moment where you've had to bring stakeholders on side. And if you were premier and leader of the Alberta NDP, and I just assume, in my head, it's 2027, and that someone is running in a general election, could be you or someone else, but in my mind, we're just fast forwarding through time. How would you manage, a divided caucus, maybe on an economic policy, or we're seeing, even provincial NDP governments, rebuff the carbon tax, the personal carbon tax. work to bring a divided caucus together on something that maybe half of the party sees as fundamental and absolutely necessary, and the other half sees as a barrier to winning in 2027?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question because it's exactly the conversation we need to have. So I think it really is about having those tough conversations, and caucuses do have tough conversations, right? Cabinets do have tough conversations behind closed doors, and then we all come out and we support the decision at the end of the day. One of the things I'm really interested in when I talk about, building a team as the second plank, is how we build that team. So I've put forward a members charter because we want to engage people, right? We want to bring people in. We want to create a big tent, right? It's great that people lent us their vote in the last election, but I would like to create a situation where they enthusiastically come
You're
forward.
not asking for a lend. They are locked in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we can grow that tent and we can have those conversations. I think some of the structure around how we do that maybe needs to change, right? I'd like to have a council of the EDA presidents so they feel like they have more input. I want to have a rural strategy. I want to do members only events so that you get something other than just fundraising emails for being a member of the NDP. I want to create the feeling that people are part of a movement.
Yes.
And that necessarily is going to be uncomfortable in moments, right? Because we have a very broad tent. My experience has been that people are pretty happy to have those conversations. And if you're sort of open and transparent with them, it works out pretty well. I think even as a caucus, we could stand to have a few more, especially now, right? We're a big 38-member caucus. We come from some pretty different perspectives.
Yeah.
I think more of those conversations and making sure that we're including everyone's voices is good. And I think, we have to build the understanding that at the end of the day, we're going to make a decision and everyone's going to have to be on side with it.
Yeah.
And, you can build some amazing things. I had the legalization of cannabis file when we were in government,
which I'm sure was very celebrated in some quarters.
It was, but the opinions ran the gamut, right? Even in the stakeholder world, right? Some people are like, this is going to create nirvana. There'll be no more crime. And other people were like, the world's going to degenerate into anarchy. There'll be riots in the streets, right? And none of that happened, right? But the
people are just at home having a gummy, right?
Yes. The perspectives were really, really wide, right? So how did we build that consensus? Well, we did what was at the time the largest consultation in the history of the province.
Okay.
And we worked with people. We had very good support from the civil service. The Cannabis Secretariat did an amazing job. But even internally, I walked that policy around to all of my colleagues before we brought that legislation. It wasn't the easy, I should say, waddled the policy around because I was 8 months pregnant at the time. But that's how you build consensus, right? Is by bringing everyone in and saying look, you're not going to get everything you want, but tell me your top concerns.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's obviously very critical. I think that's the success to, from my outsider's former staffer perspective, right, is that ability. So, I mean, that all sounds lovely. And I mean, you have some really strong people on your team. And before we started recording, I was like, oh my gosh, who's coming with her today? Because there's one person I wanted to meet in particular, but another time, hopefully. But talk about, you've got Julia Hayter here today. Who else is on your team?
Yeah. So the co-chairs of our campaign are Irfan Sabir and Shannon Phillips. So they're both colleagues of mine.
And Shannon was the one who I was like, oh my God, is she going to come?
Yeah, Shannon's amazing. Yeah. She is absolutely amazing.
I love you too. It's okay. We met before though.
Yeah. So they're colleagues of mine from cabinet. Right. Their support was very instrumental to my decision, to be honest. And they're amazing parts of the team. They provide advice, they provide input, and I really am trying to run it as a team.
Right.
So Julia and Amanda and Gurinder are newer colleagues here in Calgary that were elected this term. Heather Sweet from Edmonton was obviously with us in government, and Jasveer was a 2019 elect. So I feel like it's, kind of runs the gamut of new folks, old folks, everybody kind of coming together. And honestly, that team, I think, is our strength, right? Because the more sets of eyes, especially in politics, right? Where it's like the tiniest detail can be spun. I think the more sets of eyes and the more input we have, the better we can build something, right? And, you know, honestly, this has been the most amazing experience of my life, but it can be really tough in moments, right? And having those colleagues around me has like, it really makes it a lot easier to do what I do.
What has been the toughest moment so far?
Oh gosh. I don't even know that I could pick one necessarily. Like the launch was amazing, but like anything else in the world, like you're gonna get criticized, right? People are gonna come out and they're gonna say
I love the sun, and people will be like, I like clouds, right? Like literally.
Yeah. No, and it's, you know, so, I mean, it's obviously a race. We're obviously going to have differences. And in moments when you've had differences, like I got very heavily criticized for that tax cut policy. And internally too, right? Like that's what's different about this race is that, you know, it's my own colleagues that I'm running against, right? And some of them are going to disagree with the things that I do, and they're going to do it fairly vehemently. And so, you know, that sort of criticism, I think in a lot of ways is good for the party, right? Because, you know,
as long as you can come together ultimately, right?
I think we can.
Okay.
I think we can. You know, I think, you know, people are saying like, oh, well, like why would you give more money back to people? And I'm like, well,
first of all, it's their money.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, I don't think that makes me not a New Democrat. Some people have said that.
Really?
I'm
sorry about that. That's not a fair criticism in my opinion.
Yeah. I think that caring about people is our values, right? I don't think we should cede that space to conservatives and particularly to the UCP, because I don't think that they do care about people.
Well, I mean, I honestly really dispute the idea that the UCP are really fiscally conservative, right? I really, really dispute that.
Yeah, I think that's legitimate, actually.
I don't see them. I mean, when and this was shades of last week's podcast with Racky Pancholi, but when I moved here in 2012 and people were like, you know, why don't you join the PCs? And I was like, you're not fiscally conservative, actually. You know, coming from BC, I was like, you know, this is just not my cup of tea. But yeah, I think that just allowing the UCP to own the economy as an issue, right? Like they're not the best, in my personal opinion, the best fiscal managers, right? At least,
no, I totally
let's talk
agree.
about acetaminophen from Turkey, right? Or
Tylenol or whatever they're calling
whatever it is. Tylenol, that's really you know, or, you know, how much money was wasted on, you know, a pipeline that didn't get built, or right? Like you can't let no matter who it is, you can't let the opposition or whoever you're running against get away with these things.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
their record.
Absolutely. So yeah, they gambled $1.3 billion on the hopes that Trump would be elected. I wouldn't call that fiscally conservative.
No.
Their current R-Star policy, this idea that we should give away
corporate welfare. Yeah, which is what it is.
Exactly. So there's a lot of stuff that they've done. I mean, even the war room, right?
Yes. Yes. Well, and on R-Star, I mean, as a business owner too, I mean, the idea of who you extend this offer of corporate welfare to, right? As long as they're ideologically aligned with you. I just, you know, like that doesn't make sense to me. If you make a mess, you clean it up. I feel like that should be, you know, true for any political party. So, you know, it's hard for me to have conversations sometimes because, you know, like why can some parties get away with some things and then others are held to a much higher standard, right? So even in the context of like the Alberta NDP, you know, why is it that people can't get their minds around the fact that you actually might be a party that is, you know, economically friendly, right? Or is going to do something to like grow the economy. It's just the idea of, you know, like, oh, it's the NDP, bad for the economy, bad for jobs, bad for like whatever, right? And that's a really lazy and easy narrative to spin, but is it factual?
Yeah, well, and I don't think it is. Like in terms of, you know, fiscal, like if you look at it as like debt or deficit, like putting aside for a moment the fact that we had about $1 billion in resource revenue and they had 24 billion last year. Like actually Kenny's deficits in the first 2 years were larger than any of the NDP deficits, right?
Yeah.
Nobody seems to remember that for whatever reason. But that was the case, right? And we actually had an incredibly good economic policy platform to put forward in the last election. I just don't think that people heard about it, right? Because it does tend to be politics in like short, sharp sound bites, right?
Yeah.
And that's not because there's anything wrong with people. It's because, they're worried about like getting their kids to school
100%.
and making dinner.
Yes.
And
yes.
So it's really on us to communicate that. And I think that what we need to do is just talk about it a little more. Right?
Well, and to that point, some of the conversations it's on my mind a lot in terms of, there's an unfortunately well-known man in Alberta with an outsized influence in Alberta politics, with the ear of the premier. And, even in thinking about, when he, the people that he can turn out, right? The activation that he has. And it's not to say that those people they don't have busy lives. They're not managing like soccer practice or hockey or, trying to get to the grocery store, or like their lives are busy, right? But on the flip side, on the more progressive, just on the opposite non-Voldemort part of the spectrum, those are my words, not anyone else's. You've got the same busy moms, busy dads, the people who, care about families and about doing a good job at work and all of the same struggles, but then don't necessarily activate themselves in the same way politically. And then you see on the other side, and then they have an outsized role, right? Because they become the vocal minority, not at all representative of society. How do we get people who also care, and I know they do, people who care about, being an inclusive province, about making sure that everyone feels that they belong, that the government isn't, hitting down, is trying to, make sure that everyone feels safe and included and seen. How do you get those people engaged? And I'm sure that in a campaign too, right? You're trying to get those people involved. How can we do a better job of that, just generally, in your opinion?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like the quintessential problem of politics, in my view. So, like, you have really loud voices on either end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Like, if you think of the political spectrum as a bell curve, actually, most people are in the middle, right? But you hear most from those who are the farthest left and the farthest right, right? Because they're like very engaged, very loud, right? And you're like, how do we engage these people in the middle, which is most of the people? I think a lot of it is about talking to them about things that are important to them, right? Like our worst instinct of the NDP, and sometimes we lean into it more than I'd like, is to tell people what they should care about. We shouldn't be doing that, right? People care about what they care about. Yeah. And this is a representative democracy. So we should be talking to them about what they care about. Right now, I would say the thing that they care about most is
the economy.
Yeah, economy and costs, right? Yeah. Like their personal finances, because costs have gone way up and their wages haven't kept up with that. And so they're struggling. And even if they are covering their basic costs, they feel like they're not putting anything away for tomorrow, right? And so that's a big concern. So I think that we, when we talk to people about the issues that are most important to them and how to work on those issues, and once we have that problem solved, then people can sort of focus a little more on like what we can all collectively achieve together. Yeah. But some of it too is about talking about it in a frame of opportunity. Like look to the South, right? Addressing climate change, which is something we absolutely must do, really is an economic opportunity, right? The jobs created that pay well in something like carbon capture it's something we should look forward to.
So you wouldn't put a moratorium on renewables?
No, I would never put a moratorium on renewables. And I'm not saying that there weren't valid concerns, right? Like we should care about our food production.
Yes, 100%.
But like, as someone who read the government's legislation and regulations, we review regulations and rules around things all the time.
Yes.
Without shutting down an entire industry.
Honestly, that's an area of the economy where you're making a decision that is not in the economic interest of the province, right? but that's not the story that gets told, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And like, it is absolutely possible to review it. And now we've been through that sort of review process, right? And the supposed moratorium has come off, but arguably, like, it's been banned in large places, or it appears to be. Like, this is the other thing. The rules are incredibly unclear, right? They're like, it might be within 35
What
kilometers.
certainty is, are they giving business to come and make sure that Alberta is a destination? Right.
Yeah, none.
Yeah. And
None.
that's on that economic narrative, right? That's why I just fundamentally don't believe that the UCP are actually strong in terms of their messaging on the economy. It's just, that's not what people believe.
No, I totally agree. And I think one of the things we really have to lean into is like challenging this trickle down economics.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah. Good for you. I'm so happy that that worked for you and you're, you've succeeded in life. Other people, have bigger boots and maybe no straps. Right.
Yeah. And, barriers are things that really exist, right? Like, if you have,
and you have to acknowledge them, right? You do have to acknowledge them, right? Like, gender can be, part of, or pieces of your, being an intersectional feminist, right? So the pieces of who you are can be a barrier to different things in life, right? You can't just this is like a very big pet peeve of mine, right? Because I actually don't know if the premier would identify as a feminist. And I don't know if she's ever been asked that, like, outright. But, like, it's just simply the idea that, if we just create a level playing field, everyone, right, we have to understand it's uneven.
Yeah. Well, and like, creating a level playing field is more complicated, right? Because if you're taking a job where you only earn like whatever 82 cents on the dollar, and you also have to pay for 3 children to be in childcare.
Yes.
That's not a level playing field.
No.
So I think we need to understand, like, people use that term level playing field, but they use it incorrectly, right? And when we try to step in to level the playing field, to recognize that, like, women don't earn as much as men, but women of color earn even less, right?
Yes.
So when we try to like address those inequalities, people say like, oh, well, you're not creating a level playing field. No, that's exactly what we're doing. We are creating a level playing field. That's what this, exercise is. And that's what, say, something like public education does, right? It creates a level playing field. Every child has the opportunity to succeed.
I would hope, right? We know that there are disparities.
Yes, in its best instance. So if you do it right, it should give children the opportunity to succeed based on their own skills, their own talents, their own merits. Instead of based on the bank balance of their parents, right? Which is kind of some of what we see right now.
Yeah. Well, and I am like, not just like pro-choice, bodily autonomy, but like pro-choice in terms of other areas as well. But I do think there's like space for that, right?
And, absolutely.
Yeah. And I would hope so. So, and I was someone who did lend my vote in the last election for the first time. I had never voted NDP in my life.
Okay.
I know, right? So, because I used to live in Calgary-Elbow, and so I was a supporter of the Alberta Party, but in the last election, it was really important to me that, I voted for Lizette Tejada actually in what is that?
Calgary-Climb.
Yes, Calgary-Climb, your neighboring constituency. Well, I know I didn't actually start. I started a timer, and then I think we're going long, but so 2 quick questions. Okay. And then we'll wrap up. Okay. If you are on a continuum, a spectrum, and Raki, Sarah, Gil, and Nenshi and yourself are on it, where are you on the spectrum in terms of left, right, and center?
Oh gosh. So here's the thing about me. I don't actually feel like the left right thing captures things really that appropriately. So some people would say that I'm very right because I talk about the economy a lot.
Right.
I think my perspective on the economy, my perspective that the economy needs to work for everyone, that trickle down economics doesn't work, that we need to support those in the bottom and middle. I think that is a left-wing perspective on the economy.
Okay.
I would say like I am a big believer in public education and in public health care. I'm not going to argue with a parent over their choice on education, but I do think we need to invest in the public education system.
100%.
We are now the lowest per student funding in the country, in the richest province. I think that is an embarrassment.
Yeah.
I think in terms of public health care, like I am in favor of pharmacare 100%. I think this thing that
you wouldn't be rejecting Ottawa's offer.
I would not.
Free diabetes medication. Well, not really free, but diabetes and contraceptive care.
And I actually like to put it in the economic fiscal frame.
Yeah.
I actually think that's wildly fiscally irresponsible.
Yeah.
Not only does it fail to recognize that women should have access to contraception, it also fails to recognize that diabetes medication saves a ton of money in the acute care system.
Yeah.
And this is the whole thing with healthcare, right? If we invest in our family care, in family medicine and ensuring that that's what I want to do.
Right. Over the long term will be better for our budget.
Exactly.
And for people.
Exactly. So I think we should put more into family medicine. Mm-hmm. So I guess you would call those, relatively left-wing perspectives.
Not to me, right? And maybe that's because I don't know. I'm like a really confused, like, what am I? Especially in an Alberta context. I think, I would hope that would be everywhere everyone is, right?
But I think that you probably know exactly what you are. It's just that someone's told you you have to place yourself on this like left-right spectrum. And you're like, well, can I just think whatever I think?
I mean, it's hard coming from BC because I was a member of a party that is a coalition of federal liberals and federal conservatives, right? United to keep the NDP out of power. And then I came here and then everyone's like on their own team, right? No one plays together, kind of. In my opinion, it was just, it was like,
well, and arguably I am part of a party who is a coalition of all different federal parties, right? Yeah. Like if you look at the electoral math, I have voters that are federal liberals, federal NDP and federal conservatives.
Okay.
And that is the case all over the city or the math doesn't work. So, I think it's just more complicated than that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think more people need to hear that story maybe, right? Around who that 10 actually includes. Because, if I think there's an impression of like exclusivity in some ways, right? Like if you haven't been a lifelong member of the NDP, then maybe, maybe you're too economically, right or center, right? But is there a place for them? I think in the lens of the lend me your vote, in bringing those people to be, I'm not lending you my vote, you have my vote on a more permanent basis.
I support you enthusiastically. And I think we can bring a lot of those people in, right? We just need to lean out of our worst instincts, which are like, oh, you're not left enough, or you're not this, or you're not that. Like you're not who we are. Yeah, in a terrible way. Yes. And we really need to stop doing that. Like, let us focus on that which unites us rather than that which divides us. And yes, we can still have those conversations. Of course we can. And I do think like those voices that keep pushing us forward, that keep pushing us to like make more progress.
Yeah.
Those are important voices. They are, but like, let's not attack each other. Let's like agree on the things we agree on.
Well, I mean, in the feminist world as well, right? It's like, in order to, and yesterday was Women's Day, right? So everyone's like, for a moment, it's in the spotlight and then it's, today. And, in order to achieve what we have to achieve, like, we might actually have to work with people that we don't agree with. Right. And we can acknowledge, hopefully, this would be my dream scenario, that we can understand that the larger cause that we're working towards means that we need to partner in some way. Right. And you can have your perspective and your politics and your ideology, and I'll still have mine. But this is the larger picture, and this is what we want to do together.
No, that's absolutely.
We can go back to, not liking each other or then our coalition can kind of, dissolve in some ways. Right.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I used to say like, I